Hi. So in the last video we have made these cards, and we have seen what are props and what is a component. So we basically created three different card components, and we called these three components in my post component, like these, and then we rendered out the post component in my app.js component, right? So this was component nesting and prop passing. All right. So now we have seen like what a JSX is, what component is, and what are props in React. So now the only one thing which is left as part of the React fundamentals is the state, right? So in this video we will talk about state, and before that we first need to understand like why state is relevant, right? I mean, what is it that I cannot do without React? Okay, so let's jump into the video. Okay, so you can see I have commented out my post component, and I'm doing this because I don't want to use this thing, this post component. What I'll do is in order to explain state, there is one very conventional and common example, which is a counter example. So what I want to do is I want to create a counter constant, which is initially be 0, and then what I want to do is I want to create first of all I want to render this counter, and below that I want my buttons to be there, and button should be to increment and to decrement, right? And the reason why they are not visible is because my so first of all let me do one thing, because the reason why it's happening is because in my app.css I have the color of white and my display is flex. So what I want to do is basically to just remove this, just for this project only, and then what I'll do, so now I can see my the counter is visible. So what I'll do in my index.css, so this is the temporary setup, right? So first I want to do my font size to be, I want to increase my font size to be 4 rem, and I will give this a color of black. Okay, and then second thing would be to give my button some styling, so that okay, so in my button first of all I will give some padding. So padding should be 1 rem from all the sides, and then width should be 50%. Okay, and then font size should be 4 rem. Okay, and then what I want to do is in my body I will text align center. Okay, another thing which would be, yes, so in my app.js I will give this a BR so that they have their own line, and I will wrap this inside a div. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to basically attach an on-click listener or an on-click to my button, and I'll call this increment because the function it will be performing is to increment my counter. And similarly my second button will have a job to decrement my counter. Okay, so I'll call this decrement. Okay, and so I will also need to define the function. So first increment will take no argument, and it will simply increase my counter. So you can see that I've changed my const to let, because you cannot alter the value of const, right? So that's why I have changed it to let, otherwise it will throw us some errors. And similarly decrement, and it will, what it will do, it will simply decrease the value of. Okay, so now what should happen? If I click on increment, my value of counter should increase by 1, and if it is increased by 1, then it should re-render on the screen, or it should update the value of counter from 0 to 1, right? And let me just console log this out. Okay, here too. Okay, so now if I click on the click on plus button, the value should be 1, which is 1, but and if I click on decrement, it should be 0, and similarly that's how it works. But in my in my browser, the value where it is, the place where it is rendering my counter, it's not getting updated, and that's the thing. So I mean, it is working, my functions are working properly, they are updating the value, but my browser, it's not updating the static values, since this is treating the constant, is getting treated as a constant, and my app is not re-rendering the JSX, I would say. Okay, and that's the problem in React, and the problem is solved by state. Okay, so what state does is, states basically reacts to reacts to the changes that we do in our component or in the app. Okay, so what we will have to do is, we will have to convert our counter variable to a state, and whenever my counter is updated, or whenever my state is updated, my app will re-render itself. Okay, so now let us define a state. Okay, and in order to define a state in a function component like the one we are using, so we have to import something which is a hook from React, and the way we create a state. Okay, so this is not a state. Okay, useState is not a state, it gives you something which is a state. Okay, so I will, so it's basically returns an array. Okay, so this is called destructuring. Okay, we are basically taking out things from useState. So the first thing that we take out is that state, and you can call this anything. So I'll call this counter, and the second thing which useState gives you is called as setter function. So which means that it will be used to set your counter. Okay, so you cannot use your increment or decrement there, or you can use, so if this counter were a state, so you cannot just increase the value of state. Okay, so the way you alter the value of a state is by using its setter function, and that comes along with it from useState. Okay, so set counter, and let me remove it so that it does not give you an error. Okay, so now, and I can also, okay, so, and here what you will pass inside the useState, you will pass the by default value of counter, or you will pass the initial value of counter. Okay, so in my case the value is 0, and let me just comment out these things, and we run it. Okay, as you can see, it's not breaking. The function, the buttons or the increment method and the decrement method are not doing anything, so that's why nothing is happening. Okay, so now in order to change my counter value, what I'll do is, I will call my set counter method. I can do the same thing in the on click only. I don't need this increment and decrement function, but since we have created them already, so we will use them. Okay, so set counter value should be counter plus 1, right? So this is the counter, and we are incrementing it by 1, and similarly, okay, let me just save it. So if I increase it, now you can see that it has updated the value from 0 to 1, right? My decrement does not work right now because of the same reason, but my increment is working and it is updating the value. Okay, how cool is that? And in my decrement function, I'll do the similar thing. So I'll call my set counter, and it will just simply decrement the value. Oh, it's decrement the value. So now I can decrement it right? Okay, so now there are a couple of things that we need to keep in mind when we're working with state. So the first one would be, whenever you are updating a state, or whenever somehow the state is getting updated, your component will be remounted or re-rendered on the screen. What do I mean by that? Is whenever my counter was getting updated, remember, by increment or decrement function, my counter value was getting updated, and the way it was possible is when React is recalculating the value of JSX, and recalculating the value of JSX or a function's return value is to call the function again, right? If you have to calculate some return value of a function, then you'll have to call that function, and then which means that React is calling app function again, which somehow means that React is re-rendering the value of app component. Okay, so that was the first thing. Second thing would be, if your state is updating, your component will re-render, which we talked about, but every child component of that component will also re-rendered on the screen. Okay, I repeat, if your state is getting updated, your component gets re-rendered on the screen, right? But if that component has some other child components, then that child component will also get re-rendered on the screen. Okay, and there can be many children of a single component. So for example, I have this demo. I've created this demo component, and it is inside my component. So you can see that this component does not do anything. It only prints out that I'm rendered on the screen. Okay, it is just to demonstrate that whenever I update, so it will run when I am okay, so let me refresh it. Now the value is 0 and it rendered on the screen because I'm calling this function in my app component. If I click on plus, my state is updated, which means the counter is getting from 0 to 1. Then component is also, then my demo component is also getting re-rendered on the screen. That's why it is printing 2 times here. And you can see every time I click on increment and decrement, this demo component gets re-rendered on the screen, and that's why it's printing rendered on the screen, right? And there are couple of more things that we need to keep in mind. So, and we will learn them when we will be learning use effect hook, which is very important hook in React. Okay, so in the next video we will talk about some other things in React. Okay, so yeah, thank you so much. We will see you in the next one.